international treaties on human rights and Kenya's sovereignty as well. So how does this revised foreign policy deal with this perceived alleged complicity in abduction of foreign nationals?
You know, I think first and foremost, it is important to be very clear that Kenya is not complicit in any forms of abduction, and that we deal with very legitimate cases of arrests, including arrests of individuals who could have flouted laws of our neighbors, within our neighboring countries. And so because of our treaty obligations, and it's good you mentioned treaty obligations, we are members of the East African community. And within that context, for example, with Uganda, we have a mesh of frameworks that govern our security relationship. And when you look at certain provisions of the East African Treaty, they provide even for rights of hot pursuit with regard to individuals whom could be considered to have committed a crime in a country such as Uganda. There is a cooperative arrangement between our intelligence communities and authorities to be able to facilitate the return and the handover of individuals that are fallen foul with the laws of their countries. And so there is nothing that the Kenyan authorities did with regard to the individual that you mentioned outside the remit of our treaty obligations and outside the frameworks of our own laws.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because it was not an isolated incident. Weeks before that, Turkish refugees were assisted, essentially back to Turkey by the Kenyan government. Before that, we had 36 of, Ugandans from, again, opposition leader Besige's party, who were transported across the border and charged with terrorism, something that some would call extraordinary rendition. But the reason I'm asking is because we are talking about Kenya's revised foreign policy. And I did go through, the 20-page draft foreign policy that was presented to the president. You'd note that territorial integrity was a key objective. In fact, the issue of national sovereignty is mentioned 14 times in that document. It explicitly talks about the protection of Kenya from external actors that seek to undermine both the Kenyan state and the freedoms and rights enjoyed by citizens. Again, just going back to the event of the former opposition leader, Uganda's opposition leader, Kizza Besigye, is Kenya within this revised foreign policy?
100%. Don't forget, Michelle, that East Africa is on the road to political federation. We already have, a common market. We already have a lot going on between the countries of East Africa. This is the core of, of countries that we relate with economically, socially, at the people-to-people level. There is free movement of goods and services and people. So there is a huge level of interaction. So the border between Uganda and Kenya is it's what I consider to be a very thin border, so to speak. We are increasingly building what is called shared sovereignty within the remit of East Africa, because we have shared norms. We even have a shared court, within the East African court of justice. And so it's very well within the context of protecting our sovereignty to also facilitate a country like Uganda to be peaceful.
Right.
Because it is in the peace, in its peace, that Kenya can be able to benefit in terms of trade and commerce, and other forms of interactions that we have.